Hello and welcome to Diversifying Data. My name is Charlotte.
And I'm Rakhi.
And today we have the brilliant Sathya Bala. She is not only the founder and CEO of True Change, the diversity, inclusion and data consultancy, but she's also the founder of My Skin, My Story, a global community which empowers women of colour to be successful on their own terms. Welcome.
It's so good to have you on here. And I was saying to both of you prior to the podcast, I am coming in completely blind. I'm so excited just to hear your story, hear how it's developed into this point. So should we just dive straight in?
You are in for a ride.
I am so excited. Okay, so I think just telling us a little bit about yourself, your journey in your words. Just feel free to kind of start where it feels right.
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, my personal story and my work story is always super connected. So I'll give you the spiel.
We love a spiel here.
So yeah, I'm Sathya. I was born in Singapore. I'm Sri Lankan Tamil. I grew up in Sydney, Australia from the age of 3. And then I was a classic kind of early 20s person. Everyone was doing it in Sydney. Everyone was like, let's go to London. And told my mum, I'll be there for 18 months. Been here 13 years.
Oh, wow. I love that.
So I'm one of the many Aussies in London, but I guess my story along the way has been kind of unique. So I think growing up in Sydney, Australia, I was really lucky that I was being Sri Lankan Tamil, living in Sydney, which is a big city. There was a big Sri Lankan Tamil community there, which was great. So I did Indian classical dancing, Bharatanatyam, which is big within the Tamil community.
I did Bharatanatyam and I did Kathak as well when I grew up.
There you
That's
go.
so interesting. I didn't know is it, sorry to interject, is it kind of culturally you grow up and you learn how to do that, or was it?
Yeah, so basically my mum was a Bharatanatyam dancer until she was like in her early 40s. So it's specifically quite big in my family, but kind of the running, well, is it a joke or is it fact? That's just funny. But the running theme was kind of growing up when I did in Sydney as a Sri Lankan Tamil girl. You basically had to do at least one of a set of cultural things to kind of keep your links to your roots. So it was Tamil class, Verna class, which is an instrument a bit like a sitar, but it's kind of different and again, big in the Tamil community. Carnatic singing, which is kind of the classical singing, or Bharatanatyam. And I lucked out. I got Bharatanatyam, yes, which I love. But yeah, it's kind of one of those things where, I don't know, you talk to various people and for some of them in their communities, it's Sunday school or Chinese school. And being Sri Lankan Tamil in Sydney, it was kind of, you did at least one of those things. And that's what I did. So
do you remember much of it?
Oh, so I did it till I left Sydney. So I was trained and it was a big part of my life.
That's incredible.
And I actually kind of got back into it a few years ago and performed at a dance exhibition in Excel Centre. But I was not good. My knees, I can't.
You're always your biggest self-critic though. Someone who's trained for that long, I doubt that you would have been terrible.
It is kind of like in my body, but the problem is my knees are kind of different and you're always in like a bent position. It's painful.
Yeah. Age catches up, doesn't it?
It does. But you know the biggest accomplishment, and then we'll get off the tangent, is because I hadn't like performed on stage since I was kind of 20, and then my mum sent over my costume, and it's because it's a classical dance form. It is one of the oldest dance forms. It evolved from the temple dances, hundreds, thousands of years ago. Yeah. And so it's very elaborate. I don't need to tell you, but there's things on your hair, the jewelry, there's kind of head jewelry, there's fake hair, there's flowers. The costume is about 4 pieces. So anyway, my mum sent the costume over from when I was 18. And guys, in 3 months, I lost weight and I fit in it.
Oh, wow.
So for me, I was happy.
As a woman, no, honestly, in every sphere, if you can get into a costume when you were 18, that is all you need to do. And the rest of it, I'm sure the performance was great, but that must have felt so nice going back to that moment.
That was the kind of highlight.
Yeah.
I was like, I fit in it. Yay.
Oh, that's so cool.
But yeah, so kind of growing up, identity was one of those things that I think many people kind of have questions about, feel kind of, if you feel othered for any kind of reason, and many of us do actually, because That's kind of the way society is structured, and it kind of doesn't matter where you grow up. But for me, kind of growing up in a very majority white space, things have changed now in Australia, but basically my choices were, am I Australian, which meant white, and kind of white values and what is okay for white kids to do, or was I Sri Lankan? And because at that time, unlike the UK, which I kind of love this about the UK, that there are, if we look at Black British culture or British South Asian culture, there's generations of it here, and there's a hybrid culture that's been established.
Absolutely.
Whereas when I was growing up, it's like, well, the Sri Lankan culture was the culture of our parents straight from the mother country, which I couldn't relate to.
Yeah.
Or I was Australian, but that was kind of completely different, and I didn't look like an Australian. So I was kind of torn. So, for various reasons, also being Hindu, also being a woman, a girl. And so those things were kind of percolating in my mind, but I was a very happy, joyous kid. I did well at school. I was very lucky. I had a very middle-class education. My parents were super obsessed with education. I went to a private school. I think I really recognize the privilege of that more now than at the time.
Absolutely.
So then, I did the good immigrant kid thing. So I was like, okay, overachiever at school. I've actually forgotten all of this, but my parents moved house recently. And so they were going through our old stuff. And the list of extracurricular activities, I don't remember any of it, but I did a lot.
Oh my God.
Where the energy came from to do it all.
Yeah, but it's so interesting you say that, because honestly, my whole growing up mirrors that completely. I spoke to my mom about this the other day, and I said, how was I doing? Swimming on Monday, karate on Tuesday, ballet on Wednesday, and flute, guitar, everything. But I think it is that sort of culture that you're brought up with. You need to overachieve and excel, not only in academia, but you've got to do everything and try everything all at once and see how it goes.
And so, that was me. I ended up doing IT at uni. I was a bit confused. I had actually, the way it works in Sydney is you put in preferences for courses at specific universities. And based on your marks, you can pretty much get in. It's not complicated.
Okay. It's quite, because similarly from Brisbane, you literally sit an exam in your last year of high school and you get like, great, you've got an OP between 1 being like, you're at the top, to a 24, which is like, you spelled your name right, mate. That's about it. And then you go through and you're like, great, I got an 11. What can I get into? And I'm like, great, I can't get into law, but I could get into justice. Let's go into here. And that university wants a 12, but they want a 10, so I'll apply to that one.
Oh, so you do it based on the marks that you get and then aligning that with 100%. What's available to you. That's so interesting.
I always found it interesting too that it's not just your last year.
Yeah.
Year 10 is more important than year 11 is like a wash year. But year 10 is where like they really start to look at you. And then year 12 is like, right, you've got your OP exams, your written one, your maths one.
Gosh.
Yeah, so it was kind of straightforward. Like you get a mark, and then every course has a mark. And if you get more than the entry mark, you get it.
Wow.
And there's a big book published.
Yeah.
Oh,
so I was very confused, right? So I loved English at school.
Yeah.
I was good at maths, but I did not love it.
Mm-hmm.
I've been kind of always this, I guess the theme is I've always been between worlds. Like even when I talked about the culture bit, but even I was kind of one of the only students where I could have done the most advanced version of English and maths for my last year, but they couldn't program it because in the schedule they would never run those. They run those classes at the same time because people don't usually do that.
Yeah.
And so that was the thing where, so my preferences looked like I had psychology, I had graphic design, I had law, and I had IT. And then I was actually enrolled in graphic design, went to America with my parents while the results came out. This was like before, I think there was email, but there wasn't like mobiles. So then we weren't around to get the results. And then I didn't hear back from the IT degree because it was like a scholarship course. So then I enrolled in the design one. And then literally I arrived back, and a week before enrollment, they're like, oh no, you got the other one. There's still a space. And because I got paid to go to uni, I was like, okay. And so that's why I did IT.
Oh my God. That's so, I love that. That's so honest. So you got the scholarship part already sorted anyway.
Yeah. So that course was like a scholarship course where you went, you were paid because you had 2 work placements full-time for 6 months. So the companies in essence pay you and you get money. So I mean, so I had 4 different faculties. That's the design faculty, the law faculty, the psychology faculty, the IT faculty. I was confused. Right?
Yeah.
So, life is a series of accidents in some ways. So that's kind of a long story to say that I did IT. Again, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I went to Deloitte because my uncles were like, it's a great idea. I was like, okay. I could have gone to a bank for a graduate program or Deloitte, and I went to Deloitte. I think I pulled from, I was an independent kid, but I listened to my family and my parents, and so they were kind of like, do this. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. Because even though it's a good idea. So you should do it. Yeah.
Although I guess the one point where I was kind of had that kind of fight of what do I really want to be when I grew up was when I had a big blow up with my parents when I was 16 because I wanted to be Alicia Keys. That was not going to fly with a Sri Lankan Tamil household. So then I was like, well, if I'm not Alicia Keys, I particularly don't care. I'll do IT.
You've just thrown another confusion into the mix because you've got graphic design, you've got law, you've got maths, and also Alicia Keys. I kind of get it from your parents' perspective. She's excelling in everything. And now she's going to throw Alicia Keys into the works as well.
I always wanted to be a singer. So like growing up,
cool.
and even now I do a lot of dancing still. And, so I have an alternate reality in my head where I was in the creative arts. So, but let's just say I'm an art lover and not a creator. Unfortunately, I've had to reconcile that. And so then I jumped on the corporate ladder. I did 3 years at Deloitte in audit across IT and non-IT. And then I came to London and I really started to reflect on when you move somewhere from where you grew up, you start to see things differently. Because I came to the UK and I was like anything, you need to suss out the place, right? You don't know all the unwritten rules. And it also makes you think of the place you've come from. So I really started to note how my race kind of felt different here. People didn't say things to my face, but I could feel that there were things happening that I didn't understand. And it felt like it was about my race, or there were things that I noticed that my accent, I kind of call it accent privilege, where people would actually get confused with my accent and then in their heads, they're talking to me as if I'm a white Australian. And so they would say things to me they wouldn't necessarily say to you as a brown British person. So
do you have an example of anything just
so this isn't specific to that, but I had a couple of people just tell me that, who were white and English when I arrived. They would say, oh, because, you can tell my accent a mile off.
Yeah.
It's like, and I kind of love how in the UK people understand Australian, embrace Australians. I'm not dissing that. I love it. I've benefited from it. But, within a few sentences of, oh, you're from Australia, where are you from? Like, in Sydney or whatever. And then they would just say, oh, I mean, you must be so glad you're here because Australia is so racist. And it would be kind of the third thing out of their mouth. And I was just like, well, first, I don't know what to do with that. Yeah. Also, second, I'm not sure, like, white people should be telling me what country is more racist because it's really down to my lived experience. And it's just kind of something that I'm not sure. It's this emboldened thing where people feel a comfort because I'm Australian and will really lean into and ask all these questions and feel safe being curious about my Australianness, but they will never ask me even a tenth of those level of questions or express a tenth of that curiosity about my brownness. And it's like, well, I'm quite obviously both.
Yeah.
And I guess I would only notice that here because in Australia, everyone was Australian, right? So so it just like opens your eyes and just like it also gave me the ability to be a bit more critical of Australia because what I love again is I have really connected and we'll get onto it with My Skin, My Story is I've really connected with people of color, across the diaspora of many different cultures, particularly women of color. And actually when I moved to the UK, Black women have been really warm and inviting and supportive people in my life. And actually growing up, there wasn't a Black community that was significant. And I started to realize, oh, wow, Aboriginal and First Nation people were completely excluded from my life.
Yeah.
I didn't see them at school, at uni, at work and I was at Deloitte. So I was at clients. I was going to different offices.
And there wasn't at that stage.
No, it's just completely excluded. And so, it gives you that fresh perspective. So, I was doing the audit thing. I had the luxury of working at some really large organizations, which kind of adds credibility. And then I fell into data, and that was something that from audit to data isn't a stretch.
Yeah.
It was kind of new at the time. I made that shift when I was at Sainsbury's. And it was really down to people saying, hey, this is an area that we want to create a role in and we think you'd be great at it.
Yeah.
And the rest is kind of history on the professional side. But really it's through my data kind of profession, I've really been able to find this new sweet spot, which is my passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Data is such a big ingredient of it.
Yeah.
And very few people are talking about or really putting into practice how you bridge those two things to make change sustainable.
Yeah.
And so that's really kind of what this next phase is. And I guess, through my personal life, you've heard I've had various moments where I've questioned things, reflected on myself. And I think when you're any kind of other, you can you're primed to recognize the other in other people.
Absolutely.
So it's not just, right, so my things might be race, ethnicity, religion, gender, but I've also always really connected with people who are other in different ways. And I think just kind of that understanding and that kind of passion is also what led me to do some of the community work I'm doing too.
That's amazing. I mean, so many questions off the back of that, even the first instance. Going back to that data and bridging the gap, that's the piece that I think we try to highlight here, but also I think people just have a deep trouble connecting the two dots, like data, diversity, inclusion. How do we bridge that gap? Do you have any thoughts on how you went about doing that, or in the first instance, how you saw that gap?
Yeah, of course. So most recently, I worked at Chanel as the head of data governance. And actually, this is how, for me, I often think that you need to be in tune with kind of what's going on, but also a lot of things are accidents. So in 2019, I interviewed for Chanel, and I had been going through this personal journey of I wanted to be more intentional with how I used my time and influence to further the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda, right? I had just decided that. It was kind of a deal breaker for me. So then Chanel came along. I was interviewing for them at the end of 2019, and I made it really clear. I said, the next role I take, I want to be a leadership sponsor for diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I'm at that stage now that I can have a passion project, and that is not just a work thing for me. This is like a life thing. So that happened. Then 2020 happened, right? So I kind of got my offer at the end of 2019, had already agreed. So I reported into the CFO, so for global finance, that I would be kind of driving that agenda. And then literally I started in March 2020. COVID happened. People were starting to talk about that the effects weren't proportionately spread out, right? Yes, it impacted everyone, but it impacted people to different degrees. Then we started to really pay attention to the fragility of Black lives in society, right? With the murder of George Floyd and many other people, Breonna Taylor. And so, I mean, I had already been given this agenda, but now everyone was talking about it. And so I was really able to use my role as a data person, which was an accident, right? Because I was just the sponsor. But when I was in these conversations about, right, what data do we have about our colleagues and how they feel? If we want to run a survey, how do we reuse that data? Can we cut and slice it intersectionally across things? These are questions that I'm not sure, well, I know if you're not a data person, it doesn't come to mind until we build that capability beyond just data teams, right? And that for me was the passion. I mean, that's kind of just a simple example, but that became really obvious that the data skill set was wildly important in all these discussions to drive the DEI agenda. And then if I fast forward, I then realized this was so important to me that I didn't want it to just be a bolt-on piece of work, which is why I then started True Change, which is the business that I launched. I left the stability of corporate life, which I've done.
Scary or
I think it's more scary because people tell me I'm being brave. Otherwise, I just feel like I'm doing what I meant to
Yeah.
do.
It's natural. Like, this is what I was
Yeah.
set up
Yeah,
to do.
that's amazing.
I just feel very calm about it. It's kind of everything has geared me here. But I think just hearing people tell you that you're brave can kind of freak you out. I know it's lovely.
Yeah, of course.
Feel that way?
It's, yeah,
But it's like,
this
am
is
I
natural.
doing
Yeah.
something dangerous, ridiculous?
Yeah, it's never going to be ridiculous. But then I get that. Data governance at Chanel is just, for most people, or for myself included, I'm just like, ah. And then you starting off your own business, it's so exciting more than anything. But it's always a question of when you move from one thing to another. To me, I'm still at the stage where it's a little scary for me personally. So sometimes you project that onto other people and ask them, oh, is it kind of the same for you? But it sounds amazing.
I remember the first time we spoke about this, going back a while now. I just think it's so inspiring. Like, you get to take control of that narrative and have not only the data that you collect for companies, which we'll get into a little bit, but also you get to drive change that's so ever expanding beyond the walls of just one organization.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that for me is, whether it's here, whether it's in Australia or the US, there's so much potential for you to have an impact that goes beyond just, hey, well, here's a tick box for an organization, but to the real lives of people.
Yeah, and I mean, that was I kind of feel like I was compelled to do this work, right? So, when you talk about what does this intersection mean, I think, even if we ask the question, well, what is diversity, equity, inclusion data? Well, it's like many things. So it is things like the demographics of your workforce, right? And actually knowing, how do you consistently collect that or map that across different jurisdictions? Yeah. Hey, data is quite helpful. We talk about data consistency and data quality and who owns that data. You need to know that, because in many cases, organizations are trying to collect more data or new data they've never collected before. There's things around, actually, we make commitments around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but what are businesses really doing? Well, behind that is data. So do we have metrics? Data people are great at taking complex organizational objectives, like we want a single view of the customer, and then working that backwards into data. That's what everyone was talking about in the data world 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
DEI is just another outcome, right? Let's take these complex things like where are our hotspots in terms of where people aren't progressing within our organization? Where are we actually hemorrhaging talent? Where do we have perhaps lack of objectivity in hiring decisions? Yeah. How do you assess that? Data, right? So this is data at the process level, it's data at the workforce level, and it's data from a measurement standpoint to say, actually, of the thousands of things we could measure, what are the top 5, 10 things we want to? And hey, data people have been doing that for yonks, right?
Yeah.
Around sustainability, around vendor management, around customer, around, all of these things. And actually, we are primed.
Yeah.
We have that skill set. It's just applying it to a different context. And I think it also helps break away this focus on just the emotion of DEI.
That's what I was going to say as well. It seems, for me anyway, it's always so much of it, it's an emotion behind it, but you've got to put the facts, the figures, use it in the same way that you use data in other scenarios. And that's how you can turn it into tangible results and actually get reports out there that are actually meaningful and can, impact and create change.
That's the key thing for me. I think we're in a key part in society at the moment where it's no longer just about like, oh, look, this is what it says. It's like, no, this says this. So what is our action that follows
and what does it
from
mean?
that? If we're seeing statistics that say our workforce is only 15% of Black females, then actually what is happening there? Why is that happening?
Yeah.
And is that something that we can embed in our, progressional processes, our hiring mandates? Is that something that we need to address even in an allyship level and unconscious bias level to be able to overcome, and then use that data again to measure what is our success in doing this? Are our actions having an impact? And I think that's one of the key things I recognize working in DEI at Kubrick now is how do we actually use that in a way that's going to have long-lasting impact rather than this reactional change that I've seen quite a bit in various companies.
Yeah, and I think that the point is here of also this is not just happening in your own organization. There's actually data and reports and information out there, but I just feel like there aren't many people looking across and benchmarking that. And that's one of the things that I've done very recently. So there's a large kind of luxury department store in the UK that I did my first client engagement with, which was very exciting. And it was actually working with their diversity board to say, right, this is your plan for 2022. These are the key actions you want to take. What are the metrics that we should be using? And actually, it's not just randomly or from a goodwill standpoint trying to figure that out as an organization, because actually this is new. Let's acknowledge the fact that we don't have all the answers. But actually, I was able to provide a view of actually, let's look at other organizations. What's happening in retail across the world? There are actually some great leaders who are already doing metrics, or we're already sharing data, sharing how they report their methodologies. And then it's a question of where do you want to position yourself in certain areas, like perhaps supplier diversity. Maybe you're ahead of the curve, so you want to really be at the kind of front of that. Maybe on the representation of hiring area, maybe you don't have as much data, so you don't even know where you are now. And so perhaps you want to be a bit more cautious with targets. But the question is, do we even know where we are now?
Yeah.
Do you think that people need, for example, with retail and luxury retail, do you think they need more guidance? Like from your perspective, do you think that it's the not knowing that scares people more than the doing?
100%. And I think it's across all industries, right? Yeah. So I think we need to acknowledge the fact that this is really important. For me, why I'm doing the things I'm doing is that I'm impatient for change, but I'm still an optimist. I feel like the world is going in this direction, but I think we all know that it's not happening fast enough, and you need to have intentional, really intelligent interventions to make change. Like, as I said, I started off as an auditor. What you learn in audit is you go in, you assess a process, and then you either have to tweak controls or add controls to make the thing change. It doesn't just happen. And it's the same thing. How do we embed DEI in everything in terms of how we look at suppliers, in terms of how we engage with our recruiters? You know, are we even tracking things like the diversity of our candidate slate before we even review it? Because if we don't,
success pipeline,
how do we know?
Look like
Exactly.
Who's coming in here? Who comes out that end? But also, and we're going to talk about your other community organization, My Skin Story, in a moment. But very much looking at that intersectionality aspect as well. It's no longer, you used to hear these terms like BAME all the time. And it's like, actually, that's, you know, multiple communities. You can't group them together. LGBTIQ as well. It's always referred to as one. I'm like, well, actually, the trans experience is very different to the bi experience. And we need to start having those conversations. It's not a community, it's communities. And I think that's largely what some of the conversations we've had I see come through a lot is you recognize that. You recognize the importance of that intersectionality and actually looking at what are the lived experiences and what is the follow-on of that. You know, it's not just the female agenda, it's the Black, the Asian, the white female. What are they and what are those experiences that come through?
Individual experiences.
And, you know, what is individual experiences aggregated other than data? That's it. So actually, it's not about being fixed. I think we're really great as data professionals of kind of going on the fly and dealing with ambiguity. And the point here is we don't want fixed reports of where we think we are in organizations on DEI. Actually, if you have intelligent data with people with data skills, you can cut and slice that, because actually maybe in a month's time, you'll be clued up on a new challenge, which is perhaps how does disability intersect with gender, right? You know, or if we want to...
Diversity is a huge one we're seeing come through now.
Absolutely.
What does that look like in this added space?
So, and, you know, with COVID and various things, I think we just realized that the world is changing super fast and actually data about these things shouldn't be a sensitive topic. And I think the last thing I'll say on that is almost, you know, think of us of how we kind of approached sustainability and environment, right? So like 15 years ago, I remember when I was still at Deloitte in Sydney, there was this one woman in our audit department that kept banging on about CSR, corporate social responsibility, environment. She's like, people, at some point we need to start auditing this. This is going to become a thing. And
everyone with resistance?
Well, no, it was not resistance. It was just like, we've got a lot of other things going on.
Right, okay.
And then now you fast forward and that whole industry has moved from just forever trying to design with consultants what a sustainability program looks like. And they've evolved in terms of maturity to now have data behind it. Now, most organizations release an annual report around that because they know that they need to maintain credibility and show that their values align with their customers and shareholders. And now there's also auditing around that, right? So it's all those things are required. Yes, you need a program, you need education, but you need data, reporting, and audit. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're on the same path. It's just we're at the start. So yes, everyone's kind of trying to figure out, do I have the right program? Let's design what we want to do, but we can't forever be in that state. We need to move ourselves along that maturity curve. And I think data is a key part of that, because you can't check on progress or audit progress if you've got nothing measurable there to kind of stack up behind where you are.
And I think, just to pivot a little left, one thing that really comes through when you speak about this is that individual experience, having that person who was like, guys, come on, we need to focus on this. That really shows the importance of amplifying your voice and using your perspective. And I think that's something that I've recognized you do with My Skin, My Story, and bringing some incredible women together to talk about their lived experiences. I'd love, if you don't mind, if you could share a bit about that.
And I'm so, this is the part where I was really excited just to hear it from your perspective, because I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I feel like this is my metaphoric baby, My Skin, My Story, which I love. So again, you know, in 2019, I was kind of having a moment where I was reflecting on things, and I'd realized that through my personal life and professional life, I had both consciously and subconsciously kind of gravitated to other women of color. So I think we all are full of multitudes. You know, identity is not one thing. I'm many things, but actually I realized over my life and my lived experience that being a woman, being a person of color, being dark-skinned, being Sri Lankan Tamil, being racialized as brown is kind of a big part of my day-to-day life. Not because this is on my mind a lot, but because the world kind of treats me that way. So I have to respond to that often. And often, you know, if we don't feel comfortable in environments, we gravitate to people who share that othering, right? That's natural. And so I realized just through my life, my closest friends were women of color. When I went to work, it was younger women and younger women of color who gravitated to me, or I gravitated to them. And it would be an informal kind of coaching, mentoring relationship, or I would just kind of suck them into my friendship circles, because there's something about when you don't see many people like you. And I realized, again, I did really well in the professional world quite young. But the higher you go, you become what we kind of call a unicorn, which is you might be the only person like you that looks like you in your team, on your floor, in extreme cases in that whole building. And so then other people like that who are coming up, they are excited to see you and that you're doing well, right? Yeah. So that was happening kind of on an organic level. And I just realized I want to be intentional with this. This is a community that I love. Yeah. My favorite people are women of color. They're all awesome, but I feel like a lot of people don't hear about our experiences. You either go to a women's network or a race network or whatever. And actually for me, I can't decouple those two things. If something happens, good or not so good, like a microaggression or an overaggression, I'm sitting there and I can't tell whether it's because I'm a woman, I'm brown, or both.
Wow.
I don't know. Yeah. And so I can't pull those things apart. And actually, often it's because of both, right? And this is where the terminology intersectionality is so important. It's something that came out in the 70s as a formally defined term by an amazing Black woman, Kimberly Crenshaw. And it originally was around the Black female experience, but then now it's talked about of how intersecting identities, when you're othered on more than one, let's say, characteristic, it doesn't just have a kind of additive effect, it has a multiplication effect, right?
Yeah. In
terms of the ramifications. So then I thought, look, these women of color in my life, they're awesome. They have women of color in their lives who are awesome, but I wanted to find a community for me, to be honest, where I could just experience that and kind of be in that safe space where we were just kind of celebrating each other. Yeah. And there are some great organizations out there, but I found that none of them were exactly what I was looking for. Because for me, going back to that thing where I wanted to be Alicia Keys, I enjoyed like not hanging out with just professional people. Yeah. right?
Yes.
So, you know, for me personally, I have friends who are dancers. I wish I had more creative friends because, again, as I said, I want to be Alicia Keys. I have that alternate
I feel
life.
like once this podcast goes live, there's going to be so many requests for like a singing duet or something that's going to happen.
I've sung at a lot of friends' weddings, but yeah, that's about it.
That's exciting.
So that, you know, for me, I draw a lot of strength. I have friends who are entrepreneurs who work in charity, and actually all these kind of organizations that I was finding, they were either focused on professional women or professional women of color or leaders, emerging leaders. But again, I love learning from younger people. I actually think younger generations kind of snap you out of the things that we can't even see because we've been institutionalized. And so I was like, I'm going to build something because I know a lot of women of color, and I kind of love the fact that I can talk to, I don't know, a director at a bank, as well as talk to a journalist, as well as talk to an artist, you know, and actually all our stories are valid and we can learn from each other. I can learn from an inspiring 21-year-old who's just kind of out there doing activism and owning their space. And actually, I need to hear that as a 30-something-year-old woman. So that's what was the kernel behind My Skin, My Story. Again, it all started to happen at the same time. I was thinking about this in 2019, bouncing it off some friends, got some collaborators in March 2020, and then COVID happened.
Yeah.
We started building this thing. We launched at the end of June after Black Lives Matter was really in the focus. And actually people needed community because things were happening that was super triggering to especially the Black community, Black women, but also just talking about race and gender is triggering for people that have to deal with it, right?
Yep.
It's great that we're talking about it, but it takes an emotional toll. And so this community ended up being a real lifeline during that time. And it's called My Skin, My Story for a reason. It's about bringing women of color from all walks of life. You don't have to be a working woman, whatever that means. You don't have to be someone who is on the track to be a leader. You don't have to be in a certain country, right? Because actually, I also think it's really important we hear stories from countries that are majority not white, because I think sometimes we always come at it from a certain angle.
Totally.
And actually these issues are there as well, but we can get to the heart of it by understanding beyond just kind of the Eurocentric, white-centric experience, which is in fact ours.
Our experience. I just, this is resonating so much with me. And I think community is the one thing, you're right, that just doesn't, sometimes you just don't know where to go to vote, and to have your story vocalized and have it, giving it validity wherever you come from. And I think myself being a professional woman, I'm sometimes looking for mentors who can help me out in the career, from a career perspective, but just being heard in terms of actually my experience, not just in my work life, but it's all so valid. I think that's just giving people the comfort to be able to say, this is what I've experienced, and sometimes just leaving it at the door as well, and then being able to go out and live their lives. It's not something that they feel consistently oppressed by, but they just want a place to vocalize, their shared experiences as well.
I think that's something that really shone through. So one thing that I know My Skin, My Story does is they have these quarterly allyship webinars or sessions as well. And I attended one, it must have been about 2 months ago now.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating to hear from these various speakers, but also to see this common thread that I guess me as a white woman, I don't pick up on that. That's not something I recognize and then go, I can relate to that. But to hear for very, very powerful women talk about this, and in particular the one that really resonates with me, and I'm so sorry I can't remember her name, the police officer who Zoe, and she was talking about, she was going for promotion, and she, when she didn't get that, it was a question for her, is it because of my race, is it because of my gender? They were factors that came in, whereas that's not something that I would ever have had come to mind. And that to me was almost confrontational, to be like, wow, what can I do to kind of help with that? And then you also have this other thing about, white savior comments. It's like, no, don't come in. What do I do? I'm now just sitting here panicking. But that I think is so important with what you've done with this community. It's important to be comfortable being uncomfortable and hearing those hard truths and understanding what you can do to create that space within what they want you to do, what you can do, without coming in and mandating. This is my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think that I would really like to hear the core reason. I know you've given your whole explanation on everything. It's been so helpful. But the crux of why diversity and inclusion is so important to you, if you had to sum that up, why is it so important to you personally?
Yeah, to me, it's as simple as making sure that everyone, whoever they are, can individually be successful on their own terms and thrive. Because if individuals can thrive and we remove the barriers behind that, we live in a more productive, successful, but a healthier and a happier society, right?
Yeah.
And if I bring it back to My Skin, My Story, that's actually one of the missions. Yes, I'm focusing on a certain community, but the outcome is the same. And actually the mission of My Skin, My Story is to bring women of color together so that they can connect, they can empower and elevate each other to be successful on their own terms. Because actually many of us are dictated to what we can and can't do. It may not be overt, but actually, and this will be the last time I bring up Alicia Keys, but I use it as a funny example.
Please don't. I'm going to put the theme of falling behind this podcast, I swear.
But as an example, I probably wasn't talented enough, but I sit there and I question, so how many young brown girls growing up in white countries just thought that they couldn't be a singer or a dancer or artist because they never saw anyone like that? They haven't even been given the permission to explore that potential or even believe in that dream. How many people actually eliminate dreams from their consciousness and possibilities? Actually, it's a lot because, there's so many studies of if you ask a kid, right, who's 5, a bunch of kids, what does a scientist look like? Right? What does a doctor look like? What does a nurse look like? What does a fire person look like? We are from the age of 5, there's so many studies, we are already limiting our own beliefs and what we believe of other people. And so to me, it's as simple as that. If we look at an organization, how much are we missing in terms of talent and potential and innovation? Because we rarely tap into 100% of the talent pool, and the people we have, we don't tap into 100% of their potential. And so I think it's as simple as that, really. And for me, I think with My Skin, My Story, so many of those tenets can be applied. What empowers people is actually, where is their place of belonging? My Skin, My Story is a place which is not just a destination, but it's a connector. How do we make sure that people, whoever they are, have a place where they don't have to explain themselves? The cost of entry is not, when I tell you this is my experience, I have to justify it. What's so safe and beautiful about My Skin, My Story is women of color will share their story, and a lot of people there will say, I get it. And all of them will say, I believe you. I mean, it's not even a question. Whereas actually that's not what the world feels like. And that's why every month, I run these events where the majority of them are just for women of color, but we start those events with 2 women just sharing their story for 5 minutes. It could be about anything, work, family, relationships, the home, their own communities. And it's so, so powerful. And actually I question, and it comes up in these sessions, where else are these women sharing that? How much are we keeping hidden and is not utilized? So,
And I guess to add to that, we talk about like where else can they share that? But where else are they heard?
Yes.
That's, you've had so many just on the female perspective rooms you sit in and you speak up and you go, okay, well, thank you. And you never hear it again. It's like, don't think you heard what I said. But that you've facilitated that opening. You've given not only a safe space, but for people to keep coming back to and feel that presence, that sense of community. And that is what really, like the session I went to, like I said, I talk about it now 2-3 months later. I remember messaging you, like, you should have been on this.
Absolutely. I was kicking myself because, I mean, I think, especially in the professional life, for myself included, this is all resonating with me so much. But you, not in terms of fitting in, but you just want to hide everything. Sort of, you want to come in, and I said this on the last podcast, for me, I want to come in, do an excellent job. I'm a really hard worker. That's what I want to show. But you don't necessarily have to hide everything that makes you unique in order to do that. And I feel like people from other communities or communities that maybe don't feel as well heard or seen, you tend to do that just instinctively. It's not something that I put any effort into doing. It's not like I go in and say, right, I'm going to hide the fact that I'm an Indian woman. I'm not going to eat anything or I don't do it consciously. No. It's just a thing where you feel, I want to blend in and do a good job because that's what work requires of me, or this situation requires of me. But that's not the case. In terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you really want to put forward who you are as a person, and that moves everything forward rather than fitting in with what others expect of you.
Yeah, and I think, you know what it is? There are some people, it's about choice and whether you feel safe or not. Because actually some people do just want to go to work and get out, and that's fine. But the point is, if you're hiding things about yourself and what you're capable of and how you see things, your creativity, and it's because you don't feel it will be accepted or you don't feel safe to do it. Even to your point, if it's subconscious, we're conditioned for this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of this work is not just about educating, you know, dominant groups. We also have to unlearn, you know, from whatever marginalized groups, unlearn our things. We have been taught to assimilate and not congregate with each other.
Yeah.
If you talk to some people, they'll say, actually, oh yeah, I'd meet with my friend. You know, if there were a bunch of Australians in the office and we went for lunch, people would be like, cool, the Aussies are going for lunch. If a bunch of, I don't know, Black women want to meet for lunch, they might go downstairs and meet at the reception because they don't want to draw attention to themselves.
Yeah.
So fine, if they're just private and they're doing it for that reason, great. But are they doing it because they think they'll be judged for it?
Yeah.
That's where we're trying to break the difference. So it's like, how can we allow people to be who they want to be and bring all their strengths and their skill set without the fear of actually it won't be accepted or they will be penalized for that? And I think that's the real difference, because some people aren't going to want to come to work and talk about their personal lives and all these other things, and that's fine as long as it's their choice and not a conscious or subconscious reaction to, I don't feel like I would succeed if I brought that.
Yeah.
And that's where we really need to question ourselves, you know, whether it's at if it's at the church meeting that you run every Sunday, whether it's in the organization that you are a part of, whether it's in your family. You know, we've all been through Christmas and if you celebrate it or that time off. But yeah, what are people holding back because they don't feel safe? Yeah. And I think if we really even question ourselves, we change in different environments.
Yeah.
That's again fine. But when are we doing it because it's coming out of a place of fear of rejection or consequence, or that we just know that it won't add to our success, it might take away from it?
Yeah, that's really valid. Charlotte, do you have any more questions to run through?
I mean, I have 100, but I can't take the whole day.
I was going to say, I was like, please let me. I said that because I was like, please stop me talking because I have so many questions.
No, but I think one key thing I really want to make sure we get out here is, how can people connect with you? How can they get in touch about True Change? How can they get in touch to join one of the sessions you run with My Skin, My Story?
Yep.
Yeah,
Sure. So I'll just in a nutshell say with My Skin, My Story, this is a global community, largely online, because that's been kind of, I guess, the silver lining of COVID. We've all learnt how we can connect that way. So there's a few ways to find us. If you're a woman of color, I run a virtual event, and it's all free, by the way, once a month. For anyone who wants to be an ally, who doesn't identify as a woman of color, there's something going on each quarter, as you mentioned, where we share stories. So with that, there is a website, myskinmystory.com. Events are on Eventbrite there. There is an Instagram where I do some Insta lives where we get deep on a one-on-one level with a woman of color to share their stories and share about the events. That's at myskinmystory_. And then we also have a LinkedIn page. So there's lots of ways. And that's really about, I think, in terms of engaging, I'm also looking to keep that free for women of color, but actually there's things that I've learned, and there's things that, Charlotte, I'm sure you can attest, are really powerful in creating spaces where, I moderate and bring out stories in a safe way for people who are willing to share them. And so actually also looking for organizations to support, because actually that's something that we can do within organizations as well. And then with True Change, as I said, that's kind of the business that I'm really growing right now. It's really kind of geared to people who are driving change from diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether you're a leader or within that team or you're sponsoring it, and trying to bring data into that picture. So doing work like figuring out your data strategy to support that, helping advise on metrics, helping to actually understand what data you've got. But there's also the flip side. So within our data world, I know we didn't talk about it too much, but there's actually a whole lot of DEI things we should be doing. So if you're a data leader or work in a data team, there's a framework that I've created called Equity by Design, which is to say actually data people and data teams are impacting. We have so much influence what's going on in our organizations. If you look at a chief data officer, they've got a budget. They're doing all sorts of things around automation, around predictive analytics in terms of artificial intelligence, you know, feeding into these things. Well, these things are changing how customers interact with us, how they deal with products and services. It's changing how we operate as a society as these innovations happen. But are we making sure there's equity built into that design? The simple example I often use is if you go to most public bathrooms now that are a bit fancy, the tap comes on automatically, right? If you swish your hands underneath. I learnt recently, I always thought it was me being, I don't know, daft or something because I really had issues working it. But it's because I'm dark skinned. I have to activate it with my palms up
that is so
because all the data that it's been trained on is to work on white skin. It'll be the same for hand dryers and stuff. That's something that's now standard in most public bathrooms. Yeah. Think about the impact of that.
Wow, that makes
so I have to
sense.
do that and now it works. But who was behind that? Those were
Yeah.
data people. And actually, how are we working with our profession to build the knowledge, the capability, and then into the design? Back to what I talked about with audit, you only change processes by kind of creating interventions from start to finish.
Yeah.
So how are we looking at our data processes and life cycles for digital and data products? Are we looking at the people who are designing the controls? How are we questioning the data sets that are fed into it? How are we then questioning who's testing those things and bringing in views that aren't represented? How are we then debugging and having a feedback solution? Because actually, yeah, maybe with that tap thing, even with all the equity by design, maybe we would have only figured out that issue once it's in use.
Yeah.
What's that feedback loop to fix it and redeploy? It has such a huge impact. There's so much we can do. So with True Change, it's really that kind of two-way dialogue of how do we build data capability and skills into the DEI agenda, but how do we build equity principles and concrete mechanisms into how we operate as data teams and deliver data outputs. So it's really that two-way
But you're so right in terms of the process that you just explained is a process that is utilized in so many different aspects of data. It really is just embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion into that same process feedback loop that we have in so many other aspects of the data world. So I think you've tied it together so perfectly for me. And I had no idea about the hand dryer at all. But I'm just thinking, that makes
especially with the sink. So
Yes.
it might help you. I find now it's just like so much easier. So True Change, you know, it's a business that's really with heart. So it's kind of working with organizations and industry bodies. I do a mix of kind of training, coaching, and then consulting as well, pieces of work. So the website's truechange.co. We have a LinkedIn page as well. And that's really kind of where I think there's so much chance to have impact, you know, because this skill set and this understanding of data and DEI, I think is powerful. It's underutilized. And I think it's something that could be really influential in driving positive change and kind of pushing us beyond the hiccups of, I think we're beyond, is this the right thing to do? People are kind of like, what do we do now?
Yeah, that's it.
And again, I think as data people, what do we do now? It's more than just, do I have a diverse team? Equity by design, what am I impacting? How do I build this into what I'm doing? And how do you build up that capability? Because to be honest, that's not something data people have been taught in the past or had experience with. So it's something we need to keep on top of to be really effective and responsible contributors to our organizations and to our society.
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of the governance around that as well. And the data quality, it all comes down to that. Sorry, I'm completely segueing and continuing down this path. But it is so interesting that it is still relatively new, and yet the processes have been established previously.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you think that is going to move to the next stage? If you're clearly such a visionary in terms of this, but how do you see it progressing to the next stage?
Yeah, for me, I think it's three things. First, we need to all realize that things are biased and unequal by default. It might be a hard pill to swallow, but if we're not doing those things consciously, if we're pumping out data services, products, digitizations, they are biased and unequal by default.
Yeah.
Right? So that's one thing. We need to like clue up onto that, because we can't address a problem without knowing there's a problem. Secondly, it's capability building. Right. Okay, let's make sure, and Kubrick's a great example. If you are running a data team or building data talent for the future, let's build this capability in, right? So it's training and education of our data people. Just like 10 years ago, people were like, what is this data science thing, this AI thing? You can't really be an effective data leader without knowing what those things are, right? This is the same thing. So it's really building in that knowledge of what does DEI mean? How do we apply it to our processes? And then the third thing is actually let's build those interventions into our processes. Just like privacy by design was a thing that we all had to get on board. It wasn't a silver bullet. We had to build it into all the key processes. This is the same thing. So it's about systemic change. It's about that process review and re-engineering. But yeah, get on board that this is, if we don't do something by default, it's problematic and biased, then build that knowledge, which is not having the answers, but do our data teams know what questions to ask along the process? And then let's build those interventions in so that when those questions are asked and the answer's not great, how are we bringing in that complementary skill set? How are we playing devil's advocate? How are we looking for unintended ramifications? Just with privacy by design, we've got to do that end to end.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
I think we're coming to a natural segue to end the episode, but
not if you leave it to me.
but I do want to say that I think it'd be brilliant to have you back another time.
Of course.
Especially even if we could bring someone in from one of the communities you're running, because I think there's also a lot that you could really share with us and help us learn around the allyship space as well.
Yeah,
you know, how do we move through that? Even looking at, you know, like I have mixed race children, and it's like, how can I as a white woman really create and foster an environment that's going to allow them to thrive and have these feelings and explore them? So I doubt this will be the last we hear from you coming back. But is there any, before we sign off, is there any other key messaging that you would like this audience to hear?
No, I think, look, various people are going to take different things out of this conversation. I think it's being okay if any of this feels overwhelming, right? This is something that we're all on different trajectories to, but I think take a moment to, if anything here felt new, I think taking the initiative to do a Google search or look into books, I think for us with diversity, equity, and inclusion, it all comes down to personal responsibility. And so I would say, even if it's like you have a list of books that you wanted to read to improve your thinking, you know, use this podcast as an instigation to say, hey, what's one thing you can do? Yeah, it's not just about listening to podcasts, although that's great. It's like, what is the thing that you can do? Is it having a conversation with someone about the things that we've talked about? Is it that actually, you're not very clear on that intersectionality word that this woman's going on about? Maybe I'll read up a couple of articles about that. I think so much of it is around owning our part to play, and actually we need to educate ourselves, and it can be fun, right?
Yeah.
Learning is fun. This is new information. Yes, it feels uncomfortable because, like learning anything, it makes you question the things that you knew before.
Yeah.
But growing and learning is uncomfortable, but it's also exciting, and it opens up so many possibilities. So yeah, just take this opportunity to any concept that came up where you're like, oh, I'd like to know more about it. Take that time and dig in, because actually it's all about the effort we put in, and then the multiplier effect can be huge.
So our guest today has been Sathya Bala, and like I said, please reach out to her, reach out and learn more about True Change and how she can support your organisations, but also reach out and learn about the community that she's created and how you can take part in that. And that's it for us this week.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for watching.